That is called cheating. Looking up things on the internet is called cheating, which means, Pavleen, that you and I are cheating all the time. I met him in Yale University. He was working on a PhD in evolutionary biology. And I said, "Do you remember the hole in the wall?" And he said, "Sir, that's why I'm here. It's because of the hole in the wall that I'm here." You have to set up your self-organized learning environment inside the classroom when you want. And it's really, really very simple. If you have 20 children, you need 5 computers with big screens. Very important that you should have big screens that are visible to everyone. Put the 5 computers scattered around the room, and the children will obviously cluster around them. Then give them a question and say, "Can you find me the answer?" That's a self-organized learning environment.
In the year 1999, Professor Sugata Mitra put a computer in a wall in a Delhi slum to see what the children will do with it. The children taught themselves to use it. Professor Mitra spent next 25 years testing his findings in different contexts, receiving a TED Prize for his work, and building what he calls schools in the cloud. Last year, he published an honest reckoning of what worked and what didn't. Today, we will talk all about it. So, welcome to the Learning Circle.
Thank you.
Sir, you trained as a physicist and then pivoted to education. So, what connects these two words for you?
Well, I basically did a PhD in physics a long time ago, 1978. At that time, only physicists and mathematicians knew how to write computer programs. So when we came out of the PhD, then people said, to give up physics, now you know how to write computer programs, so you must write computer programs. So we all got pretty good jobs writing computer programs. It was a big deal in those days. And then my boss said, "Look, you've got a PhD. Why are you just writing computer programs? Why don't you teach other people to write computer programs?" So that's how I got into teaching. And then when I got into teaching, I got interested in, so how does this work? I mean, what does teaching mean? Why is it that I say something and whoever is listening learns something? Do they learn what I want them to learn, or do they learn something else? And since I didn't have a background in education, I could only explain it using the only subject I knew, which was physics. So that was the connection between physics and education, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. So, with that curiosity, you built schools in the cloud. And the hole in the wall experiment was also born around that time. And after several years, when you went back and met these children and assessed their learning, what were your findings and what had stayed with these children who were now young adults?
Well, first of all, the hole in the wall experiment showed that groups of children, and groups is important, groups of children can learn just about anything by themselves using the internet. Now, this may not surprise you today as much as it did back then. Back then, people were really surprised by it. But your question is more interesting than that. Is that okay? So what happened to the hole in the wall children? The problem is that it wasn't always easy to trace those children. Okay, because they were village children, they would go away somewhere and so on. So I have only sporadic instances of children that I managed to find many, many years later when they were young men and women. And there are incredible stories of one little fellow in a village in Maharashtra. I met him in Yale University. He was working on a PhD in evolutionary biology. And I said, "Do you remember the hole in the wall?" And he said, "Sir, that's why I'm here. It's because of the hole in the wall that I'm here." I used to read the New Scientist magazine. Can you imagine? A village child used to read the New Scientist magazine because nobody told him that he should not read it. He didn't know what he should or should not read. So he read New Scientist magazine. He got interested in biology, and eventually he went and landed up in Yale. 2 girls in Hyderabad, in the walled city of Hyderabad, in the slum areas, improved their pronunciation. They went on asking the computer, am I pronouncing this right? Am I pronouncing this right? And they were kind of cute to watch. When I saw them, they were little girls. And then several years later, when I went back to Hyderabad, I discovered that they work for a call center because they have very good pronunciation. So, there are many, many such instances where this confidence in being able to learn by themselves is what has helped the children to go to places that they would not have gone otherwise.
Right. And you also mentioned that nobody taught them or nobody told them what they could do and what they could not do. So, there was no adult to put a restriction on their learning. Probably that also helped. Do you think that, I'm digressing from the topic a bit, but in today's education setup, we have very well defined boundaries, but sometimes moving beyond, breaking down those boundaries also help with the learning?
Of course, it does. The existing system of education, it treats all the children in a particular age group as identical. So a curriculum is made for that this is for age 5, this is for age 6, this is for age 10, or whatever. If one child is capable of going further ahead, he or she is told, no, that will come later. You wait after a couple of years. Whereas in the hole in the wall, there was nobody to tell them that. So they just went as far as they could. And what I discovered was that as far as they could was a lot further than what you and I think, which is, I think, a great story of hope, really.
Yes, and that's a very powerful story of learning. What a child with access to a proper resource, even without an adult intervention, could achieve. So the learning stayed with these children. But what about the sites that were started as part of this endeavor? I understand when you went back and saw those sites, most of them did not survive. Only a few did. So, what were the differences between the sites which survived and the sites which didn't? So, what was the model which really worked?
Well, that's where the bad news begins. First of all, none of the original hole in the wall sites, and there were hundreds of them, none of them survived. Not the ones that I had built with funding. What did survive were the ones that were funded continuously by someone else, by some other agency. So if the
Okay.
funding didn't stop, the thing continued, which is kind of obvious. Whereas when the kiosks which I had built, when we ran out of funds, to my surprise, the village people did not think it was worthwhile for them to put in money to keep it running because they did not understand this kind of education. They would say, where is the teacher? Where are the exams? How can this be a school? And they would close it down. So then I moved the whole idea into schools and we called it self-organized learning environments. And I introduced the idea all over the world, in England, in Australia, in America, and so on. And we made these beautiful facilities inside schools. I called them the school in the cloud. Teachers were absolutely over the moon with this. This is fantastic. We can both in India as well as abroad, etc. The children were absolutely thrilled to bits. So we can look at the internet. Okay, in the rest of the school term, we are not allowed to look at the internet. We are not allowed to look at our phones. But when we go into the school in the cloud, we are allowed to do anything. All that worked fine. But a couple of years later, everything was closed, shut down. Was astonished. Well, what happened? But you guys said everything is fine. Well, the problem was that the education system itself did not ask for this kind of education. If you take CBSE or ICSE or GCSE or any of these big exam boards, they expect children to answer questions using pencil and paper alone. The soul expects children to find the answers to questions using a computer, using the internet, and in groups. The two are diametrically opposite each other. So that's what went wrong. And then I asked the teachers, isn't that a pity? And they said, of course it's a pity. But the thing is, who's going to change the system? Who's going to change the exam? When will the exam say, here is a question, look it up on the internet? I tried asking that to exam boards, and the answer was never. Because you know why? That is called cheating. Looking up things on the internet is called cheating, which means, Kavleen, that you and I are cheating all the time. So, yeah, it's ridiculous, isn't it?
You have been saying through your work, just having the information is not learning, right? You can access the information, but what you ask the internet is what is critical. So help us understand the concept of these big questions, because we know the education system is still asking these standard questions and it'll continue to do that. But having these sort of discussions and people who are working for these bigger questions, bigger agendas, I think that effort should not stop. So help me understand, what is the big question, what is the relevance, and why should we keep asking the big questions?
Well, it's called a big question not because of its size, but because of the nature of the question. So, ask a question, and let me explain what a big question is. If you have ever spent time with a 5-year-old, you know what they do. They will ask a whole series of questions. So, for example, you tell a 5-year-old, don't shout. And the 5-year-old says, what does shouting mean? So you say, shouting means talking at a loud volume. And the 5-year-old would say, and what does volume mean? And you would say, volume means when you talk louder, you have more volume. When you have softer, you have less volume. They push you back towards the fundamentals, those questions. And that's what I would call a big question. Any question, if you trace it backwards, will lead you into the borderlines of what is known and what is not known. Back to our 5-year-old, there's an ant walking. Shall I kill it? And the mother says, no, 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 that's very bad. You must never kill anything. Why should I not kill anything? Because, it has life. And what is life? And finally, the mother says, I don't know. So, they will push you back towards the big questions. And that is how we need to ask children to answer. Children like to answer questions which are fundamental questions and not a detailed question. So instead of saying, what is the rubber pad at the bottom of a chair leg called? A better question is, why do you put rubber pads at the bottom of a chair leg? That's a bigger question.
Right. You talked about the borderline of knowing and not knowing. And that border is where true learning happens. The why really carries the children into the depths of the learning. Given our current scenario of internet being there everywhere, the information being available at the touch of a button, you have proposed 3 C's instead of 3 R's. And these 3 C's are comprehension, communication, and computing. And does it tie to your idea of asking big questions in today's times? And how do teachers assess these 3 C's in their classrooms?
Well, first of all, the first part of your question, that self-organized learning, the kind of learning that groups of children can do if they're given a question, teachers like it. As I explained, the only problem is that it goes against the way in which we examine, because examination is done individually.
Right.
However, I'm in luck because the whole world has changed to where people are learning continuously off the internet. I mean, you and I, we know that. If you look at almost anyone, earlier I would have said if you look at young people, but it's no longer young people or old people or rich people or poor people or people in this country or people in that country. All of humanity is continuously receiving from the internet and increasingly putting into the internet. So we're like a hive. And in that hive, what we are doing is we are continuously learning almost exactly the same way in which the children in a soul learn. They also form a hive like structure around the internet. They also discuss amongst each other and they learn using that kind of method. So, it's not really, I think earlier I would have said we have to wait until the education system realizes blah, 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 and so on. I don't think we have to do that anymore. I feel that it is inevitable, and I think the education systems, the few of the major boards that I've spoken to, are all aware of this problem. It's just that they don't know how to do the new kind of measurement. So then I said that the problem is you're still trying to measure reading, writing, and arithmetic. But then those are skills that were important 100 years ago.
Right.
Reading from printed pages is still important, but it's not the only way we receive information. We get information from screens, we get it from videos, we get it from audio, we get it from all sorts of ways. Writing, none of the current generation is going to have to write anything much by hand. I used to earlier joke and say the only thing that we need to learn to do by hand is to write a check. But now I find that that joke is also stupid because nobody writes a check anymore. You just point your phone at a QR code and you make your payment. So why would we go on testing for written, scripted handwriting? Arithmetic, that's the more dicey one, where you say, well, what about arithmetic? Well, how do you find the square root of a number? In my generation, believe it or not, we were taught how to find the square root of a number by hand using paper and pencil. There is a method. I've forgotten, but there is a method. But nobody on this planet ever uses that method anymore. What they do is you just, ask your phone what the square root is and it tells you. If you wanted to know what the time period of a pendulum is, now there's a formula which Galileo discovered, a marvelous, wonderful formula. But do you need that to live? Not if you have a mobile phone. You would just ask your phone, what's the period of this time period of this pendulum? It will tell you. So a lot of things which were considered life skills are now more like hobbies. I'm not saying you should not know them, but you don't need to know them in order to live. And this, believe it or not, this is good news. This is good news for the billions of people on this planet who do not have access to classical schools, because this is what the classical schools teach. And I'm saying that you no longer need to learn a lot of those things. What do you need? You need to be able to look at your phone and comprehend what it's trying to say, what it's trying to say, what it's trying to show, what it's trying to write, or whatever. First thing is you have to comprehend. The second thing is, if you have understood, comprehended what you're looking at, you should be able to transfer that understanding to someone else, which means you should be able to communicate. So if somebody asks, how is a gulab jamun made? Now, I know if you're watching this from outside of India, you would be wondering, what is he talking about? Well, I'm not going to tell you what a gulab jamun is. You just listen to it carefully. Gulab jamun, and just feed that into your phone. It will tell you what it is. But you need to be able to comprehend what it says. And then if you want to make one, it's a very nice, tasty thing. If you want to make one, then you have to be able to instruct someone else that do these things to make it. So communication becomes the second important thing. Comprehension, then communication. And what do we do all this with? Well, always with an electronic device. Increasingly, that's a smartphone. It's a part of the whole family of devices that we, in my generation, used to call computers, although, no, the people don't really use that word too much anymore. So I put a third ability, computing. You should be able to get a new device and be able to find out new things from it. You should be able to learn how to operate it and so on. I think many of you may have this experience, particularly the older people amongst you would have had this experience. You get a new smartphone and you look for the nearest 9-year-old and say, can you show me how to do this? And so on. And the 9-year-old does. It's wonderful. Why do the 9-year-olds, why are they able to do it and not the older ones? Because the 9-year-olds follow self-organized learning. The 9-year-olds are the children of the hole in the wall.
Oh, that's a wonderful example of the true application of the hole in the wall philosophy. Thanks for sharing that. I never looked at it from that perspective. So this is very interesting. These three C's and definitely the need of the hour. But sir, tell me that if I am a school leader in a typical school or a teacher, then how do I help children learn these skills and assess? Assessment again is happening in very traditional ways. So, how do I assess my students on these three competencies?
Well, I wish I had a clear answer to that. I don't. First of all, assessment systems are not likely to change immediately. They will change, but they're not going to change immediately, which means that you still will have this kind of question saying, what is the time period of a pendulum? Take a piece of paper and pencil and write the answer without talking to anyone, without looking up anything. Why? Because you have to keep everything inside your head. In a world where everything we know is always inside our pockets, inside our smartphones. So until that system changes, the teacher will have to prepare her students for that kind of examination. But her job is to explain to the children that, look, this is a throwback from 100 years ago. We are going to change it one day. But unfortunately, you will have to face it. You will have to face that old 100-year-old system, and you will have to do well in it. We have to convert that old exam system into a game for the children. Otherwise, they will not play it. They will say, this is irrelevant. Why are you making me do this? Unless you say, look, you've got to do this. This is a game. This is a game from 1820s or whatever, and we are going to play this. Uh, I don't know if a teacher can get away with that, but that's the only way I can think of trying to convince a 17-year-old why they should follow this kind of a system. And indeed, they're annoyed with the system. They drop out. They don't see the relevance of the system. They often say, nobody's going to ask me what exam I passed or how many marks I got. Nobody asks those questions anymore. So what will they ask? They will look for comprehension, they will look for communication and computing. So the teacher has to do twice the amount of work she had to do earlier. She has to prepare her children for the ancient examination system, and at the same time, for the sake of their futures, she has to improve their communication, computing, and comprehension skills. How do you do that? By teaching them to ask the right questions. I've been saying that now for 20 years, but now, I don't have to explain that anymore. Do you know why? Because of AI. Everybody knows that to get any sense out of AI, you need to give the right prompt. What is the right prompt? It's a question, okay? The right question. If you don't ask the right question in the right way, you will not get the right answer. And you know what is funny, Kavlin, is that it's not I who said that. Gautam Buddha said that 2,500 years ago. Socrates said that 2,500 years ago. Both of them, one in Greece, one in India, said the same thing. Ask the right question if you want to get the right answer. And today, when we are confronted with these gigantic AI systems, the engineers tell us first learn how to make the right prompt.
Yeah, which is essentially the right question. And that is what the teachers should also be doing, although they have not been trained for that. So you also propose the sole certificate for teacher to help them learn this system. Am I right on
Yes,
that, sir?
I used to call it the SOLE certificate. You don't have to call it a SOLE certificate. It's basically to find out if a teacher has the ability to teach and use these new methods of learning, which are based on questions rather than based on answers. The easiest way to do that for teachers would be to first teach themselves how AI works. Okay, not in detail. I mean, you don't have to do a lot of mathematics and science, no, not like that. But you should understand how AI works, like anything else. I mean, imagine if you and I were having a discussion about the future of the automobile industry and whether petrol engines or electric cars will be the future. And imagine if both of us didn't know how an electric car actually works. So then I might make an argument to you saying, Kavlin, you see, electric cars are never going to work because they don't have a petrol tank. And you would say, come on, they don't need a petrol tank. They work by some other method. So teachers need to understand how AI works. How is AI trained? How is it trained? It's trained by an ancient teaching method, which all teachers know. Fill in the blank. So use that in your classroom. Instead of telling the children the whole story, tell them a little bit and say, what do you think comes next? This becomes the core of a new method. In fact, I'm writing a book about it. It's going to come out in a couple of months' time. It's called What Comes Next. So that's the
Okay, that sounds
that's,
very
yeah, well, that's the basis of how AI is trained. Once it is able to say correctly what comes next, then you say, well, it's trained now. Otherwise, if it says something wrong, then you say, now correct the parameters until you get it right. In the case of human beings, when it's children, you would say the the brown fox was going into the, and you stop, and the children will say, what, ma'am? And you say, well, I'm not going to tell you. The brown fox was going into the what? And watch what happens. Immediately you get 20 answers. Say, well, going into the forest, was going into the darkness, was going up the mountain, etc. Then you say, okay, you got to select one of those. Which one are you going to take? Oh, going into the jungle. Okay, the brown fox was going into the jungle. Then suddenly, and you stop. And the children say, what happened suddenly? And you say, I don't know, you tell me. And you say, suddenly, okay, suddenly a ghost appeared. Okay, now we've got the next line in our story. The brown fox was going into the jungle when suddenly a ghost appeared. Slowly, the story will emerge, not from the teacher, but from the learner. And you can do that with any subject.
Yeah.
This is the method of the AI. When they make a mistake, you don't correct. You say, well, if you think that doesn't work properly, then what do you think works properly? And they discuss amongst themselves, self-organized learning, and they come up with the right fill in the blank. So using that method, you can prepare children for comprehension and communication automatically. And by teaching them how to ask the right questions, you can prepare them for handling AI and the world that they're going to go into. This, I think, is the core of the new education system. But it's a hard life for the teachers. She will have to do all this in addition to training the children for a system that is over 200 years old. I can't help that.
And also the system through which they themselves have been trained. They are the product of that system only. But you very beautifully tied this entire uh, thought process, which started from ancient philosophy of asking the right questions, and how with AI in today's time, the same ability continues. In fact, that is the basis of how we use AI. So there is a lot of incentive for teachers to train themselves on this, although the system may not do it. But the teachers train themselves and then go on and train their learners, their students on this methodology. So thanks for sharing that. That is very beautiful and something the teachers can do on their own, although they haven't been trained. Now, a related question. If I am a parent to, let's say, a 12-year-old, and I want to create this kind of a culture at home of developing the three C's. So again, I focus on asking the right questions and encouraging, the children to ask the right questions.
Yes, basically, you focus on inquiry as opposed to instruction. You know, there's something interesting about the words teach and learn. When you take the word teach, I can say to you, I will teach you. Teaching is doing something to someone else. I will teach you. But you can't say, I will
It's a
learn you. You have to say, I will enable you to learn, or you will learn. I will teach, you will learn. The learner always comes from the student. The learning always comes from the student. The teaching comes from the teacher, obviously. Hence the name teacher and learner. To change the focus to the learner. Why? Because as long as the teacher knew everything, teaching was relevant. The learner did not know, the teacher knew, so the teacher would tell the learner. But we are moving into a world where the teacher increasingly does not know everything. There are questions to which no one knows the answer. Are we going to leave all that out of the curriculum? I will say no, because children love the questions to which there are no answers. We have to give them those questions, and then we have to say, I can't teach you the answer because I don't know, but you can learn the answer and you can find out the answer by yourself. And that's the way in which you can produce the new generation of creative artists, of scientists, of the people who find the answers by themselves.
Right. And this approach continues both in the school and at home.
Yes.
So, right. So you have also talked about the schools in the cloud where there were, there was a granny also who were helping students over Skype. So now we have AI. The times have changed. The children are exposed to that. They have these AIs in their home, on their spots, on their parents' smartphones. So how does that model translate now? Do they still need a granny for a human connection, or do you think the learning can continue with something like an AI tutor and it would be similar to what the gains would have been with the granny?
Well, I mean, it's anybody's guess. But I feel that the role of what I used to call the granny is basically the role of a friend, a non threatening friend, someone who has your interest at heart implicitly. That is the granny. I mean, all of us who have dealt with our grandparents, we know that there is complete trust. There is, we know that we can rely on what she's saying. We know that we can make fun of her. We know that we can do all kinds of things. We'll get away with anything. All the things which I cannot get away with my mother, I can get away with my grandmother. That's the granny. Can AI
Yeah.
replace that role? I don't think it can. To be very honest, I don't think it can, at least in the short term. It can be a friend. Many people make friends with the AI. But can you actually trust it? Will it actually have only your interest in its mind? We don't know yet.
Right. So let me bring our discussion to a very sharp point for our listeners with some takeaways. So, if I am a principal and I have 200 students and the board exams are coming, but I have clear intent to implement the soul in my school, right? So what should be the starting step for a principal who would like to have at least a couple of sessions per week of self organized learning in his or her school?
Well, I mean,
We know the limitations, we know the system, how it works, and the exams are to be conducted. They have to, students have to clear it. But what can we do? What minimum we can do to start this journey?
well, first of all, we know what are some of the things that don't work. For example, creating a special room for doing self organized learning, a soul lab, as the schools used to call it, what I built several times was wrong. They don't work. Schools cannot afford to lock up a space only for use occasionally by teachers. And that also a space which is not asked for by the government. It's something that you do on your own. So special place doesn't work. Instead, you have to set up your self-organized learning environment inside the classroom when you want. And it's really, really very simple. If you have 20 children, you need 5 computers with big screens. Very important that you should have big screens that are visible to everyone. Put the 5 computers scattered around the room, and the children will obviously cluster around them. You don't have to tell them to make groups. They will cluster around those computers anyway. And then give them a question and say, can you find me the answer? That's the self-organized learning environment. Now, how can you use it when you have an exam coming up, when you have the old system? Well, there is one very simple way. In the final year, usually the 11th year of school, I think in India, it's the 11th year of school, we prepare them for the exam. Prepare. What does prepare means? We give them questions from previous year's exams and say, now you solve this. And they're supposed to solve this by themselves, obviously. But if you took that question and gave it as a sole question and say, okay, today we are going to do this differently. Here is a chemistry question from GCSE A level. Take this question, use the internet, and find the answer in groups. They will love it. What advantage would you get? Well, first of all, they'll get the answer. They'll get the correct answer. I can tell you that. Secondly, what I have noticed is that out of those 20 children, a large number, maybe as large as 14 or 15 of them, will actually understand the process individually. So after that, if you wait for 10 days and give them that same question and say, okay, this time you're not allowed to use the internet, you're not allowed to talk to anyone, here's a piece of paper, here's a pencil, answer it. You'll find, I think, 70% of the children will actually be able to do it. It's a wonderful way to prepare for these old style exams by using the most recent method, which is self-organized learning environment. So to a principal, I would say, I can't guarantee that this will work, but here is what you can experiment with. So don't do souls using only questions which are outside of the syllabus, but do a soul with actual exam questions and do it repeatedly. And you will find that the children will pick up the ability to answer those questions. Why do I say that? Well, firstly, I've seen it. And secondly, do you not remember, at least I remember from my generation, before every exam, late into the night, 4 or 5 friends would sit together with the textbooks, with last year's questions, and they would solve them one by one, all together. If you missed that one night of preparation, you probably failed. We've all done this. So it's nothing new what I'm saying. We have always used the soul, the self-organized learning environment, to prepare for exams. So what should the principal do? Very simple. Just bring it into the classroom.
Right. And the way you have shared, it is really doable. And there is evidence of the fact that it works. The students are more engaged and the learning is retained for the longer duration. So that is a clear takeaways for the principals and the teachers to implement these learning environments in their classroom. So thanks for sharing that, sir. Any other So you shared what not to do, and that was not to use it as a standalone facility, a room, but embed it in the normal everyday classrooms for preparation of the assigned syllabus. So any other recommendations that you would have for the school, for the teachers, for the parents to implement these learning environments over and
Well, I
above?
I can think of one thing, if it makes sense. Do not steer away from recent technology because you don't understand it. Okay? You will do your children a lot of harm if you do that. And I've seen that happen where people will say, oh, AI doesn't know anything. Not because that's the truth, but because the person who is saying it doesn't know anything about AI. So do not do that. It's very harmful. What should you do? You don't have to become a pundit on everything. You have to say to the child, there is a new gadget which has come out. There is a train in China. They are saying it runs only on solar batteries, solar cells, no power at all, no other fuel. Is it true? You're very good with computers and internet. Why don't you find out and tell me? Reverse the role. Just as you brought your child up, let your adolescent child now bring you up to speed.
That's a beautiful message for all the parents also, sir, including myself. Yes, we try to transfer our own learning to them, which in most cases is outdated, and the children do not benefit by them. We should move on to rapid fire round questions, sir. So first is internet open board exams in India. Will it happen in our times? What do you think? In our lifetime, would
Yes,
it happen?
yes, yes, it will happen. It will happen very shortly, actually, in a few years' time, because there will be no other way.
Right. So next question, sir. What one big question would you give a 12-year-old?
There are so many. Okay, here is one. When human beings smile, they show their teeth. Isn't that a peculiar thing to do? Why do we bare our teeth when we feel happy? I thought baring your teeth was a sign that you wanted to bite. That's how the rest of the animal world does it. So my question is, why do we bare our teeth when we are happy and smiling?
Okay. A real big question for all the 12 years old out there. Okay. Next question, sir. One book that you would recommend every school leader to read.
Again, it would be an unfair answer to just pinpoint one book. I'll just tell you a book that I read recently. I'll just tell you a which I liked very much, and I would recommend everybody to read it. It's the name of the book is What We Can Know. What We Can
Okay.
Know. It's written by a person called Ian McEwan, McWan. Ian, I-A-N, M-C-W-A-N, Ian McEwan, a beautiful writer. So if nothing else, you'll enjoy the English, but the story itself I thought was really weird.
I definitely would pick up that book, sir. Next and the last question, sir. You have spent 25 years seeing how the children learn. What have these children taught you?
Children taught me to trust them, that the best thing that we as a human race can hope to ever do is to trust our children.
Right, that is a beautiful answer, sir. So that brings us to the close of the conversation. Thank you for the wonderful work that you have been doing, and it has been a real privilege talking to you, sir. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks, I enjoyed it.